He was 42, wealthy beyond measure, and utterly hollow for years until Clara. She hadn't cared about his money, his penthouse, or the headlines that sometimes trailed his name. She'd seen the quiet ache behind his eyes and simply stayed. Not to fix him, but to walk beside him while he learned how to feel again. Inside the box was a watch, vintage, meticulously restored, its silver face catching the light like a promise. He'd spent weeks tracking it down because she'd once mentioned, almost in passing, how her father used to wear one just like it. "Time is the only thing you can't buy back," she'd said, stirring her tea with that soft, knowing smile. And now, Lucas wanted to give her something more than time. He wanted to give her his. He walked toward her building, shoulders squared against the cool evening air, heart hammering like a man about to leap from a cliff. He rehearsed what he'd say. "I used to think success was measured in deals closed and assets owned. But you showed me it's measured in quiet mornings, shared silences, and the courage to love after loss." At the front door, he paused, took a breath, smiled just a little. "Clara," he whispered to himself, as if saying her name could steady the storm inside him. "This time, I'm not walking away." He pressed the intercom. A voice crackled through, warm, familiar, laced with the kind of calm that had become his sanctuary. "Lucas, you're early." "I couldn't wait," he said, and meant every syllable. The door buzzed open. He stepped inside, the threshold cool beneath his polished shoes. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, her scent, her home. He climbed the stairs slowly, savoring each step, each breath. This was it. The moment he stopped running from his past and chose a future. And then he opened the door to her apartment. The words he'd rehearsed died on his lips. Because there, seated on the sofa with one hand resting gently on her rounded belly, was Isabel. Isabel, his ex-wife, the woman he'd loved, lost, and buried in silence 5 years ago. She looked up, eyes wide, surprised, vulnerable, achingly human. Her hair was shorter now, her face softer, but her gaze, it was the same gaze that had watched him walk out of a hospital room without saying goodbye. The same eyes that had cried alone while he drowned his grief in boardrooms and bourbon. Time didn't just stop. It shattered. Lucas stood frozen, the velvet box suddenly heavy as stone in his palm. The watch wasn't just a gift anymore. It was a symbol of everything he thought he'd rebuilt. And now, in one heartbeat, it felt like it might all collapse. Isabel opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Not yet. And in that silence, louder than any storm, Lucas felt the past rise like a tide, and he had no idea how to swim. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller disinvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for disinvolve. Mi conti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como su fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de disinvolver com vida moco. Com vidos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters Quen 3, max December 16th, 2025, 11:47 a.m. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of Lucas's study, painting golden stripes across the mahogany desk where he sat, fingers tracing the curve of the watch face as if memorizing its shape by touch alone. He hadn't slept much, not since he'd first seen it in that dimly lit antique shop 2 weeks ago, nestled between cracked leather journals and faded pocket knives, its silver casing dulled by time but still whispering elegance. The moment he'd laid eyes on it, he knew. This was the one. Clara had mentioned it months ago, not even realizing she'd imprinted it into his memory. They'd been walking through a flea market on a lazy Sunday, her fingers brushing his, her voice light as dandelion fluff. "My dad wore a watch just like that," she'd said, pausing before a vendor's table. "He said time wasn't about schedules. It was about moments you choose to stay in." Then she'd laughed softly, eyes distant. "I never understood it until I met you." Lucas hadn't said anything then, but he'd held her words like a secret treasure. Now, alone in the quiet of his penthouse, he opened the box again. The watch gleamed under the light, delicate, timeless, real. Not flashy. Not like the diamond cufflinks or limited edition cars people expected him to give. No, this was something quieter. Something that said, I listen. I remember. I'm here, not for the show, but for you. He closed his eyes and saw her face. The way her brow furrowed when she concentrated. The quiet joy in her smile when she thought no one was watching. Clara hadn't just loved him. She'd given him permission to be soft again. To cry. To sit in silence without filling it with noise. To admit he was afraid. And today, her birthday, he wanted to give her something that echoed that truth. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over her contact. After a breath, he called. Hey! She answered, voice still warm with sleep. Good morning, he said. And even to himself, his voice sounded different. Lighter, hopeful. I have something for you. She laughed softly. You didn't have to get me anything. I know, he said. But I wanted to. Something meaningful. A pause. Then, gently, is everything okay, Lucas? The question caught him off guard. Yes, he said quickly, too quickly. Then, more honestly, I want you to know how much you've changed my life. How much he trailed off, swallowing hard. How much I want to keep choosing you. Every day. Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full, like the space between two heartbeats. I'll be at your place by 6, he said finally. Wear something comfortable. Are we going somewhere? She asked, curiosity lacing her voice. No, he said, smiling for the first time that morning. I'm coming to you. He ended the call and looked down at the watch again. Outside, the city hummed, cars, voices, the distant sigh of a siren. But in that room, there was only this moment, this choice, this fragile, beautiful hope that maybe, after years of building empires and losing himself in them, he'd finally found something worth staying for. He wrapped the box in simple brown paper, tied it with twine. No glitter, no grandeur, just honesty, wrapped in quiet intention. Because Clara didn't need spectacle. She needed to know he saw her. And today, with this small silver circle of time in his hands, he would tell her, without saying a word, that she was his now, his always. If only the past would stay buried. If only thresholds didn't sometimes open onto ghosts. But that thought came later. For now, there was only the watch, the promise, and the woman who taught him 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years of never saying her name out loud. Of flinching at the sight of children's shoes in a store window. Of deleting calendar reminders that once marked their anniversary before they even popped up. He'd thought he'd buried it all. But grief doesn't stay buried, it waits. He remembered the day they lost the baby like it was stitched into his bones. Rain against the hospital window. The doctor's soft, rehearsed words. Isabel's hand going limp in his. And then, nothing. No funeral. No words. Just a quiet unraveling. He tried to hold her, but she turned away. He tried to speak, but his throat closed like a fist. So he did what he knew how to do. He worked. He built. He disappeared into spreadsheets and mergers until the ache became a numb hum beneath his ribs. And Isabel? She vanished. No note. No call. Just an empty apartment. Her favorite sweater still draped over the chair. Her teacup drying in the sink. He'd waited weeks, half expecting her to come back. Angry, weeping, anything. But she never did. And he never searched. Not really. Because part of him believed he didn't deserve to find her. That he'd failed her when she needed him most. Now the image of her, older, weary, but carrying new life, played on loop behind his eyelids. Who was the father? How long had she been back? And why was she in Clara's apartment? His hands tightened on the velvet box. The watch felt like a betrayal now. Or maybe a test. The cab slowed. Here you are, sir, the driver said. Lucas nodded, paid without looking, and stepped onto the sidewalk. The air was still damp from the earlier rain, and the scent of wet earth rose around him like a memory. He walked slowly toward the building, each step heavier than the last. He didn't knock this time. The door was unlocked. Clara always left it ajar when she knew he was coming. He pushed it open. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. From the hallway, he could see into the living room. Isabel was still there, but alone now. Clara must have stepped out, into the kitchen, maybe, or the bedroom. Isabel had her hands folded over her belly, eyes closed, breathing slowly, as if gathering strength. Lucas stood in the threshold, unwilling to move, unwilling to speak. But she sensed him. Her eyes opened. For a long moment, neither said a word. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick with everything they'd never said. Then, softly, she whispered, "You look older." He almost laughed. Almost. "So do you." She looked down at her stomach, then back at him. "I didn't know she was yours." "Clara?" His voice cracked. "No, of course not. I didn't plan to see you," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "I came to her because I had nowhere else to go." "She didn't tell you I was here?" "She didn't know how," Lucas said quietly. Isabel nodded. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "I heard about you, that you were happy, that you'd found someone good." "I did," he said, and the words tasted like both truth and guilt. She took a slow breath. "I'm not here to ruin that." "Then why are you here?" She hesitated, looked at the floor, then back at him, her eyes clear now, resolved. "Because I'm going to be a mother again, and I couldn't do it without making peace with the ghost of the first one." Lucas felt his chest tighten like a vice. He hadn't cried in years. Not real tears, but now his vision blurred. "I'm sorry, Isabel," he whispered, the words raw, torn from a place he'd locked away long ago. "I'm so sorry I left you alone." She didn't answer right away, just stood, one hand still resting on her belly, the other gripping the arm of the sofa. Then, barely above a breath, "You didn't leave me alone, Lucas. I left us alone. I couldn't look at you without seeing what we'd lost. And you couldn't look at me without seeing your failure." He flinched. "But it wasn't your failure," she said, voice strengthening. "It was just life. Cruel, unfair life." From the hallway, a soft gasp. They both turned. Clara stood there, clutching a tray with 2 mugs of tea, her face pale, eyes wide with dawning understanding and hurt. Lucas's heart stopped. "Clara," he began, stepping forward, but she held up a hand, not angry, just shattered. "You never told me she was your wife." "I didn't think it mattered anymore," he said. "It mattered," she whispered, "because I've been living with her for 3 weeks, and every time she cried at night, I held her. And I never knew I was holding the ghost of the woman who broke your heart." Isabel stood quickly, wincing slightly. "Clara, I didn't mean—" "No," Clara interrupted, her voice breaking. "You both kept this from me, and now I don't know what's real." She set the tray down with trembling hands, looked at Lucas, looked at Isabel, then turned and walked into her bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. He wanted to knock on Clara's door, to explain, to beg. But what could he say? That he never thought the past would walk into his present, wearing his ex-wife's face and carrying a future he wasn't part of? Isabel broke the silence first. "She doesn't understand," she said, voice low, raw. "She thinks I came here to win you back." Lucas finally turned to her. "Did you?" Her eyes met his, clear, tired, honest. "No, I came because I had no one else. My husband, he died 6 months ago. Car accident. I didn't even know I was pregnant until after the funeral." She swallowed hard. "I sold our house, moved back to the city because my sister was the only family I had left." Her sister, Clara, the woman who'd held him through nightmares he never named. The woman who'd never asked about his past because she thought he'd tell her when he was ready. And he never did. "I didn't tell her who you were," Isabel continued, her voice trembling now. "Not right away. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd run from you, and that I was coming back broken again." Lucas exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing down on his shoulders. "You didn't run, Isabel. We both did. in different directions. But we ran. She nodded, tears glistening but not falling. I saw how happy you were with her. I read about your charity galas, your interviews, you smiled in them. Real smiles. I didn't want to ruin that. Then why stay? He asked gently. Because... She looked toward Clara's closed door. Because she asked me to. She said, if you need a roof, you have one. No questions. And I needed to believe people could still be kind. Even after everything. A long pause stretched between them, filled only by the rain and the distant hum of the city. Then, from behind the bedroom door, a soft voice, Isabel! Both of them turned. The door opened just enough for Clara to step halfway out. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry now, resolved. I made tea, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Both of you, come sit. Lucas hesitated. Clara, I don't need speeches, she said, cutting him off. Not with anger, but with a quiet strength that startled him. I need truth. All of it. They followed her to the small dining nook by the window. She placed 3 cups on the table. Herbs steeping in hot water, the scent warm and calming, like something from childhood. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she looked at Lucas, then at Isabel. I thought I knew you, she said to Lucas softly, but I've been living with a piece of your heart I never knew existed. He opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand. And you, she said, turning to Isabel. You never told me he was your ex-husband. You let me fall in love with a man whose past was sitting at my kitchen table every morning. Isabel lowered her eyes. I was scared. Scared you'd look at me differently. Scared you'd tell him I was here. And he'd disappear again. I wouldn't have, Lucas said. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. Would he have come? Or would he have run just like before? Clara finally Saturday. I need to understand something. Are you still in love with her? The question hung in the air like smoke. Lucas looked at Isabel, not with longing, but with a deep, aching recognition. I loved her with everything I had, until I didn't know how to love anyone, including myself. What I feel for you, Clara, it's different. It's not built on ghosts. It's built on waking up and choosing someone. Every day, even when it's hard. Clara's breath hitched. But seeing her pregnant, it shook you. Yes, he admitted. Because it's a second chance she never got with me. And I don't know how to watch her walk into it alone. Isabel reached out then, her fingers brushing Clara's wrist. I don't want him back, Clara. I swear. I needed to see his face one more time and say I'm sorry. For leaving. For not fighting for us when we were drowning. Clara looked between them, tears welling again. But this time, they carried understanding, not fear. I believed love was about the future, she said quietly. But maybe it's also about honoring the past, without letting it steal the present. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. Lucas reached into his pocket and placed the velvet box on the table. Not as a declaration, not as a promise, just as a man offering what he has, a heart still learning how to beat without breaking. Clara looked at it, then at him, and in that moment the story didn't end. It just paused. Outside, the city lights flickered through the rain-streaked window, casting long shadows that seemed to hold their breath. Isabel shifted in her seat, one hand resting on her belly, the other curled around her teacup. She hadn't spoken in minutes, but her presence was a quiet storm, unavoidable, undeniable. Lucas finally broke the silence. Clara, he said, voice low, raw. I came here tonight to give you something beautiful, not because I thought you needed it, but because I needed you to know that with you I finally feel like I'm not just surviving. I'm living. She looked up at him then, eyes glistening but steady. And then you saw her, she whispered. And the past rushed in like a tide. He nodded. It did, and it terrified me, not because I want her back, but because I never got to say goodbye to what we lost. And seeing her, carrying life, it felt like the universe was handing me a mirror. Clara exhaled slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. I've spent weeks listening to her cry at night. She never said your name. Not once. But I heard it in her silences. In the way she'd pause when your company came up on the news. She looked at Isabel now, not with blame, but with a deep, aching empathy. You loved him, and you lost more than a baby. You lost each other. Isabel's chin trembled. We did, and I've carried that guilt like a stone. Not just for leaving, but for never giving him the chance to grieve with me. Lucas reached across the table not to take Clara's hand, because he wasn't sure he'd earned that yet, but to rest his palm flat against the wood, as if grounding himself. I thought I was protecting you by not talking about her, but all I did was build a wall. And tonight, that wall crumbled. Clara finally picked up the box. She didn't open it, just held it in both hands, as if weighing its truth. Do you still want to give this to me? Yes, he said without hesitation. More than ever, because now I know it can't just be a gift. It has to be a choice to move forward, even with the past sitting at the table. A long silence followed, filled only by the soft patter of rain and the quiet rhythm of Isabel's breathing. Then, Clara placed the box back on the table and pushed it gently toward him. Not yet, she said. Not like this. I need to know that when you give this to me, it's not just because you're trying to prove something, but because you're truly here. All of you. He swallowed hard. I am. Then stay, she said. Not just tonight. Stay through the hard conversations. Stay while Isabel has her baby. Stay while we figure out how to weave these broken threads into something new. From the corner, Isabel spoke softly. You don't owe me anything, Lucas. I never came here to complicate your life. But you already did, Clara said gently, turning to her. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's exactly what we all needed. Isabel looked down at her belly, then back up at them both. His name will be Daniel, she said suddenly, as if the words had been waiting to be spoken into the world. After my father, and after yours, Lucas, if you'd allow it. Lucas felt his throat tighten. His father had died when he was 12. He'd never imagined his name would echo in another man's child, especially not like this. I'd be honored, he managed. Clara reached out then, not to Lucas, but to Isabel. She took her hand, and Isabel didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined over the table, two women bound by blood and love and the man who stood between them, not as a prize to be won, but as a bridge they were learning to cross, together. Lucas finally sat back, the weight on his chest shifting. Not gone, but shared. He looked out the window. The rain had nearly stopped. A sliver of moon broke through the clouds, pale and hopeful. And in that quiet kitchen, with steam rising from forgotten tea and 3 hearts beating in fragile harmony, the future didn't feel certain, but it felt possible. Lucas sat very still, his hands clasped on the table, knuckles pale. He wanted to say something, anything, to fill the space with reassurance. But words felt too heavy, too prone to break under the weight of what they all carried. So he stayed silent. And in that silence, something shifted. Clara was the first to stand. She gathered the teacups with slow, deliberate care, her movements calm but not detached. She rinsed them in the sink, the water running soft and warm, and Lucas watched her as if memorizing the way her shoulders relaxed, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. He had almost lost this, the ordinary grace of her presence, because he'd been too afraid to face his past. Isabel rose more slowly, one hand braced against the table for support. I should go to bed, she murmured. The baby's been restless all evening. Clara turned, drying her hands on a towel. Do you need anything? Water? Your pillow? Isabel offered a faint smile. Just quiet, and maybe thank you for not shutting me out. Clara walked over and placed a hand gently on her sister's shoulder. You're my family, Isa. That doesn't change because of who you loved before. Lucas stood then, unsure where to put himself. He wasn't dismissed, but he wasn't fully included either. He hovered near the doorway, the velvet box still on the table like an unanswered vow. Clara glanced at him. You can stay, she said, not unkindly. The couch pulls out. Relief and guilt tangled in his chest. I don't want to overstep. You already did, she said quietly. Then softer. But I'd rather you overstep here than disappear again. He nodded, throat tight. Isabel paused at the hallway. Good night, Lucas. Good night, Isabel. He hesitated. And, Daniel. She touched her belly, eyes shimmering. He kicked when you said his name. A beat passed, small, miraculous. Then she disappeared into the guest room, closing the door with a whisper. Clara turned off the overhead light, leaving only the glow from the kitchen lamp and the distant shimmer of streetlights through the rain-damp window. She sat on the edge of the sofa, not inviting him to sit beside her, but not forbidding it, either. Lucas remained standing. I keep thinking about what you said, he said after a long pause. About me not being fully here. I didn't say it to hurt you, she replied, looking up at him. I said it because I love you enough to tell you the truth. He flinched, not from anger, but from the sheer, aching clarity of it. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving the past behind. But you didn't leave it behind, she said gently. You buried it alive. And tonight, it dug itself out. He sank onto the far end of the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I'm so tired of running, Clara. From grief, from guilt, from the fear that I'll fail someone again. You already did, she said, not cruelly, but with heartbreaking honesty. You failed Isabel by not grieving with her. You failed me by not trusting me with your pain. But that doesn't mean you can't start again, today. He looked at her then, really looked, saw the tears she hadn't let fall, the love that hadn't broken, only bent. Do you still want to build a future with me? Even with all this mess? She reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her skin was warm, her grip firm. I don't want a perfect man, Lucas. I want a real one. One who stumbles, who carries scars, who's willing to face his ghosts, so he can truly be present with me. He turned her hand over in his, tracing the lines of her palm as if reading a map to redemption. I'll do better, he whispered. Not just for you, for all of us. Outside, the city exhaled. A siren faded in the distance. Somewhere a door closed. Life went on. But in this apartment, something new was being born. Not just a child, but a fragile, courageous kind of family. Not bound by romance or obligation, but by honesty, grace, and the quiet courage to stay when everything in you wants to run. Clara leaned her head against the back of the couch, eyes closed. Stay tonight, she said again. Not because I forgive everything, but because I believe in what we can become. Lucas didn't answer with words. He simply moved closer until their shoulders touched. Not to take, not to claim, just to be near. And in that nearness, in the shared silence, in the lingering scent of chamomile and rain, the story didn't rush toward a resolution. It deepened, slowed, breathed, because some thresholds aren't crossed in a single step. They're crossed in 1,000 small choices to stay. And tonight, Lucas chose to stay, not as the man who bought a watch to buy back time. He rose before sunrise, drawn to the kitchen by an ache he couldn't name. There, he found Isabel already seated at the table, cradling a warm mug, her face tired but peaceful. She looked up as he entered, not startled, just present. You didn't leave, she said quietly. I said I'd stay, he replied, filling the kettle. She watched him move around the kitchen, familiar yet changed. You used to hate mornings, she said with a faint smile. You'd bury your face in the pillow and groan if I opened the blinds. He chuckled softly, but it caught in his throat. People change, or they remember who they really are, she said. He brought 2 mugs to the table and sat across from her. For a while, they drank in silence, the steam curling between them like unspoken years. Then, softly, Isabel spoke. Clara doesn't know everything. Lucas looked up. About what? She took a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the mug. Daniel's father. It wasn't a long marriage, just 18 months. His name was Raphael. He was kind, quiet, A painter. Her voice wavered slightly. He died on his way to pick up prenatal vitamins. A truck ran a red light. Lucas felt his chest constrict. God, Isabel. I didn't call you after he died, she continued, eyes fixed on her tea. I wanted to. So many nights, I dialed your number and hung up before it rang. But I told myself you'd moved on, that your life was full, and mine was just ashes. He reached across the table, not touching her, but holding his hand open, just in case. You could have called. I was ashamed, she admitted, voice breaking. Ashamed that I needed you again, that I couldn't do this alone. You don't have to, he said. She looked up then, eyes glistening. But I'm not asking for you back, Lucas. I swear. I needed to see your face one last time before Daniel is born. To know that the man who loved me through my worst loss is still good, still kind. Because I want my son to know that love doesn't always end in ruin. The words settled between them like rain on dry earth. Before Lucas could respond, Clara appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a robe, hair tousled from sleep. She paused, taking in the scene. The early light, the shared silence, the vulnerability in Isabel's posture. You're up early, she said gently. Isabel gave a small nod. Couldn't sleep. The baby's been doing somersaults. Clara came in, poured herself tea, and sat beside Lucas. Not too close, but close enough. Did you tell him about Raphael? Isabel hesitated, then nodded. I did. Clara reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. He deserves to know the whole story. Lucas looked between them, a slow realization dawning. You knew. Clara met his eyes. She told me the night she arrived. That's why I didn't want to tell you she was here. Not because I was hiding her, but because I didn't want you to come rushing in out of guilt. I wanted you to choose us, me, for the right reasons. He exhaled, the truth settling deep in his bones. And last night, when I saw her, you saw your past, Clara finished. But I needed you to see her, not as your ex-wife, but as my sister, a widow, a soon-to-be mother who's scared and alone. Isabel wiped a tear away with the back of her hand. I never meant to come between you. You didn't, Clara said firmly. But you did show us something we couldn't see on our own. That love isn't just about new beginnings. Sometimes, it's about mending what was torn. Lucas looked down at his hands. Hands that had signed billion-dollar deals, that had held a watch meant to symbolize forever, and that had once held a wife who wept in silence while he turned away. Now, those same hands trembled as he whispered, What do we do now? Isabel smiled through her tears. We wait. We talk. We let time do its work. Clara leaned slightly against his shoulder. And we don't pretend the past didn't happen. We carry it with care. Outside, the city brightened. A bird called from a nearby tree. The kettle, forgotten, clicked off. And in that kitchen, 3 souls, knit together by loss, love, and an unexpected reunion, began the slow, tender work of building something new. Not a fairy tale, not a clean ending, but something real, something true. And as Lucas looked at the 2 women who held pieces of his heart, past and present, he realized the most courageous thing he could do wasn't to buy a watch or make a grand gesture. Clara found it tucked under the door when she came back from her bookstore shift. Plain white, no return address, just Lucas's name written in neat, looping script. She recognized it instantly. It's from her lawyer, she said, handing it to him as he stood by the window, watching Isabel nap on the sofa, one hand resting on her belly like a silent vow. Lucas's fingers stilled as he took it. He didn't open it right away. He just held it as if it might burn him. Open it, Clara urged softly. Whatever it is, we face it together. He tore the seal. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The photo showed Isabel, months earlier, standing in front of a small house in the countryside, sunlight catching the gold in her hair. She was already showing, one hand on her stomach, the other holding a painting, a vibrant landscape in blues and ochres. On the back, in pencil, Raphael's last piece. For Daniel, the letter was brief, formal. Raphael's will had been finalized. He'd left Isabel their home, a modest trust for their child, and one unusual request: that Lucas be named as Daniel's honorary guardian. Not legal, not binding, but a symbolic role, witnessed by friends and documented in private papers. Raphael had known who Lucas was. Isabel had told him everything. And in his final days, Raphael wrote, "If anything happens to me, I want her to have someone who knew her before the grief. Someone who loved her when she didn't believe she deserved it." Lucas's hands shook. Clara read over his shoulder, her breath catching. "He trusted you." Isabel woke then, as if sensing the shift in the air. She sat up slowly, blinking against the afternoon light. "What is it?" Lucas turned, the photo in his hand. "Raphael. He named me." Her face went pale. "Oh, you didn't tell me," he said. Not accusing, just aching. "I didn't know how," she whispered. "I thought you'd think it was too much, that I was asking for more than I had a right to." "You're not asking," Clara said, stepping in. "He gave, and that's different." Isabel stood, one hand on the back of the sofa for balance. "I never showed you the letter because I was scared you'd say no. Or worse, you'd say yes out of obligation and resent me forever." Lucas crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands, gently, like holding something precious. "Look at me." She did, tears welling. "I would be honored," he said, voice thick. "Not because of guilt, not because of the past, but because Raphael saw something in me worth trusting. And because you, even after everything, still believed I could be good." A sob escaped her, soft and broken. She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, and for the first time in years, Lucas didn't stiffen. He held her, not as a lover, not as a ghost, but as a friend who had walked through fire with her and hadn't let go. Clara watched them, arms crossed over her chest, not out of jealousy, but wonder. This wasn't the triangle she'd feared. It was something else entirely. A circle. A family remade not by blood alone, but by choice. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky in lavender and gold, the 3 of them sat on the small balcony with cups of chamomile tea. The city hummed below, distant and forgiving. "I've been thinking," Clara said quietly. "After Daniel is born, maybe you should stay here with us." Isabel turned to her, stunned. "Clara?" "No," Clara said firmly. "You've spent your whole life running from loss, but you don't have to be alone anymore. And I don't want Lucas choosing between us. I want us to choose each other." Lucas looked at Clara, then at Isabel. "Is that what you want too?" Isabel placed a hand on her belly. "Daniel needs family, not just a roof, not just money. People who know his mother's soul and aren't afraid of her scars." She looked at Lucas. "I don't need you to be his father, but I'd be grateful if you'd be his anchor." He nodded, eyes bright. "Always." A silence fell, but it wasn't heavy. It was full of possibility, of healing, of a future none of them had dared imagine a week ago. And then, as if on cue, Isabel gasped softly, her eyes widening. "What?" Clara asked. "He kicked," Isabel whispered, tears spilling over. "Right where your hand was, Lucas." He placed his palm gently on her stomach, and after a moment, he felt it soft, certain, alive. A new life, a second chance. A promise written not in watches or wills, but in heartbeat. Came to a head one rainy Tuesday. Lucas had just returned from a brief meeting downtown. His first since the night everything changed. He kept his phone off, ignored emails, delegated everything. But the business world didn't pause for broken hearts. A merger was collapsing, and his presence was required. He'd gone, promising to be back by lunch. When he returned, Clara was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes sharp with something he hadn't seen before. Not anger, disappointment. "You left," she said flatly. "I told you I had to." "You chose to," she interrupted. "And while you were gone, Isabel had a panic attack. She thought she was losing the baby. She couldn't breathe. And I was alone with her. Again." He stepped forward. I didn't know. But that's the point, Lucas. Her voice cracked, raw with emotion. You're here with your body, but your mind is still split in two. You're helping Isabel, but you're not with me. And you're with me, but you're not free for me. I can't compete with a ghost. It's not a competition, he said, but even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. Isn't it? She turned away, then back again, tears glistening. Every time you look at her, you see the child you lost. Every time you hold her hand at the doctor's, you're making up for the husband you failed to be. And I'm just the woman who happens to be here now. That's not true, he whispered. Then prove it, she challenged. Not with gifts, not with presents, with honesty. Do you still love her? The question struck like lightning. From the living room, Isabel appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her face pale. Clara? No, Clara said, not unkindly but firmly. He needs to answer. Lucas looked at Isabel, really looked. Not at the past, not at the baby, but at the woman standing before him. Weary, brave, carrying more than one life in her body. I loved you with everything I had, he said to her, voice trembling. But that love ended in silence. What I feel for you now, it's respect. The sorrow is a debt I'll spend my life trying to honor. But it's not romantic love. He turned to Clara. What I feel for you is different. It's not perfect, but it's present. It's messy and scared and real. And if I'm holding back, it's not because I want her. It's because I'm terrified that if I give you all of me, I'll lose you too. Clara's breath hitched. I don't need you to be fearless. I just need you to choose me. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, but because you want to. Isabel stepped forward then, her voice quiet but steady. Clara's right. You can't keep living in the in-between, Lucas. You're trying to heal me so you can heal yourself. And that's not fair to either of us. He sank onto the bench by the door, head in his hands. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix it alone, Clara said, kneeling in front of him. But you have to stop treating me like I'm a consolation prize for the life you lost. He looked up, eyes wet. You're not. You're the life I want to build. But every time I look at Isabel's belly, I see the child we never got to hold. And it hurts, Clara. It still hurts. I know, she whispered, placing her hand over his heart. But pain doesn't have to be a wall. It can be a bridge, if you let it. Isabel moved to the window, giving them space, but her voice floated back, soft but clear. I don't need you to be my husband again. I need you to be whole. For yourself. For Clara. For Daniel. Don't sacrifice your future to atone for our past. Silence fell, thick with unshed tears and unspoken fears. Then, slowly, Lucas took Clara's hand and pressed it to his lips. I choose you, he said, voice breaking. Not because the past is gone, but because you're worth walking through it with. Clara leaned her forehead against his. Then stop running, even in your mind. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. And inside, for the first time, the air felt lighter. Not because the pain had vanished, but because they'd finally named it, held it, and decided it wouldn't dictate their tomorrow. Yet even as they embraced, a new fear flickered in Lucas's chest. What if choosing Clara meant losing the fragile peace he'd built with Isabel? It happened in the middle of the night. Isabel woke gasping, clutching her belly, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Clara was at her side in seconds, switching on the lamp, voice calm but urgent. Isabel? Talk to me. It's not pain, Isabel whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's a fear. I keep dreaming he's gone, that I'll be alone again, that no one will be there when Daniel comes. Clara held her, stroking her hair. You're not alone. But Isabel shook her head. I feel like I'm stealing something. Every time Lucas looks at me, I see him wondering what our life could have been. And every time he holds your hand, I feel like I'm haunting you. From the doorway, Lucas stood, having heard everything. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but he couldn't move. He stepped inside slowly, barefoot, wearing only sweatpants. Isabel, he said gently. You're not stealing anything. You're giving us a chance to do things differently. She looked up at him, eyes raw. But what if I'm the reason you and Clara can't move forward? Clara turned to him then, voice steady but edged with vulnerability. That's not your burden to carry, Isabel. But Lucas, you have to decide. Are you here because you want to be, or because you feel responsible? He sank onto the edge of the bed, not touching either of them, just grounding himself in the truth. I stayed because I thought I owed Isabel something. But that's not why I'm still here. He looked at Clara. I'm here because when I imagine my life without you in it, really imagine it, I feel like I've stopped breathing. You're not my second chance. You're my only chance at something real. Then he turned to Isabel. And you're not my past coming back to haunt me. You're a woman I once loved, who's carrying a child into a world that's already taken too much from her. I can't undo what happened between us. But I can stand beside you now, not as your husband, but as someone who remembers your strength even when you forget it. Isabel wiped her tears with trembling fingers. Raphael used to say I had a habit of loving people who didn't know how to stay. Lucas's chest tightened. Then let me prove him wrong. A long silence followed, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of distant rain. Then Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What if Daniel looks like you? The question hung in the air, sharp and sudden. Isabel went very still. Lucas felt his breath catch. It's possible, Isabel admitted after a moment. Raphael had dark eyes, but his grandfather was fair. Genetics are unpredictable. Clara didn't look away. I'd still love him, but would you? If he had your smile, your hands, would you be able to look at him without seeing the child you lost? Lucas didn't answer right away. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he let himself imagine it. A little boy with Isabel's quiet eyes and his own stubborn jaw, reaching for him with tiny fingers. Not as a replacement, not as a ghost, but as a new soul, whole and separate, needing nothing but love. Yes, he said, voice thick, because loving him wouldn't mean forgetting our baby. It would mean honoring life, even when it arrives in ways we never planned. Isabel let out a shuddering breath. I was so afraid to tell you the truth about Raphael, because I thought you'd think I was trying to replace what we had. You didn't, Clara said softly. You built something new in the ruins. That's not betrayal, that's courage. Lucas reached out then, not to hold Isabel, but to take Clara's hand. And Clara, after a heartbeat, laced her fingers through his. Isabel watched them, and for the first time she didn't feel like an intruder. She felt like a witness to something fragile and true being born in the space between loss and hope. Later, as dawn painted the sky in soft rose and gold, Lucas stood on the balcony alone, the city waking below him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his assistant about an urgent call. A deal. A distraction. He silenced it. He wasn't that man anymore. Inside, the two women he loved, past and present, slept under the same roof, not as rivals, but as sisters in resilience. And in his chest, something settled. Not certainty, but peace. Because the real test wasn't whether he could love Clara while honoring Isabel. It was whether he could finally love himself enough to believe he deserved both grace and a future. But as the morning light grew stronger, a new fear whispered in the back of his mind. What happens when Daniel is born and the past becomes a living, breathing presence in their daily lives? The answer, he knew, wouldn't come from words. It would come from choice. Day as she was cleaning out the hall closet, sorting through scarves and forgotten umbrellas, when she saw it. The velvet box, tucked behind a stack of books Lucas had brought over weeks ago. She hadn't seen it since the night everything changed. He'd never given it to her, never opened it. She carried it to the living room where he sat reading, the glow of the lamp soft on his face. He looked up as she entered, and when his eyes fell on the box in her hands, his expression flickered. Guilt, regret, maybe shame. You kept it, she said, voice quiet. I meant to give it to you, he said, closing the book. I just didn't feel worthy. She sat beside him, turning the box over in her hands. You think love is something you earn through perfection? No, he admitted. But I thought it was something you lose through failure. She opened the box slowly. The watch gleamed under the lamplight. Elegant, timeless, exactly as he'd chosen it. She lifted it out, letting the chain drape over her fingers. I wore my father's watch until the strap broke, she said softly. Not because it told time well, but because it reminded me he was with me, even when he wasn't. She looked at him, eyes searching. Is that what this is for you? A way to make up for lost time. He swallowed hard. It was supposed to be a promise, that I wouldn't waste another second. Then why haven't you given it to me? He hesitated. Because every time I look at you, I see how much you've forgiven me, and I don't know if I deserve it. Clara's breath caught. She placed the watch back in the box, but didn't close it. Lucas, I don't love you because you're flawless. I love you because you're trying. But you keep treating my love like a reward you have to earn, instead of a gift I've already given. He looked down, voice barely audible. What if I fail again? You will, she said, gently. We all do. But love isn't about never falling. It's about who reaches for your hand when you do. From the hallway, Isabel appeared, wrapped in a robe, her belly larger now, her movements slower. She'd heard enough. I used to think you left because you didn't love me enough, she said, stepping into the room. But now I know. You left because you loved me too much to face the pain together. Lucas looked up at her, stunned. You carried all the grief alone, Isabel continued, because you thought protecting me meant shielding me from your sorrow. But real love doesn't hide. It stays messy, raw, imperfect. Clara stood and walked to the window, the box still in her hand. I was scared when I saw you with her that night, not because I thought you'd leave me, but because I saw how deeply you still hurt, and I didn't know if I had enough love to heal both of you. You don't have to, Lucas said quickly. But I want to, she said, turning back. If you'll let me. A long silence followed, thick with everything unsaid. Then Isabel spoke, her voice trembling but clear. I've been thinking about moving out after Daniel is born, finding my own place. No, Clara and Lucas said at the same time. Isabel smiled faintly. I need to stand on my own. For him. For me. You're not alone, Clara insisted. And you don't have to prove your independence by leaving. Lucas stood now, the weight of weeks pressing down on him. What if we all stay? Not as a couple, not as a trio, but as a family? Not because we're obligated, but because we choose to. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. Families don't just choose each other once, Lucas. They choose each other every day. I know, he said, and I choose you both. Clara walked over and placed the open box in his hands. Then give it to me, not as an apology, not as a promise of perfection, but as a symbol that you're here, fully, finally. His hands shook as he took the watch from the box. He unclasped the chain and stepped closer to her. She held out her wrist, steady, trusting. As he fastened it, his fingers brushed her skin, and for the first time in months, he didn't flinch from the intimacy. He just stayed, present, real. It's ticking, she whispered, looking down at it. He met her gaze. So am I. Outside, the city slept, but inside, something awakened. Yet even as Clara smiled, a shadow crossed her eyes, one Lucas almost missed, because beneath her calm, a new fear had taken root. What if loving Isabel's child means Lucas's heart will always belong, in part, to the past? To prove he was present. But presence, he was learning, wasn't just about proximity. It was about surrender. And he hadn't surrendered yet, not fully. Then came the afternoon. Isabel called him from the hallway, voice unsteady. Lucas, I need to talk to you. Alone. Clara was at the bookstore. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren. Lucas found Isabel standing by the window, arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the day. What is it? He asked gently. She turned, eyes glistening. I went to the clinic today for my final ultrasound. She paused, swallowed hard. They showed me his face, his hands, the way he curled his fingers around his knee. A tear slipped down her cheek. He's healthy, strong, and he has your jawline. Lucas felt the air leave his lungs. I know I said it was possible, she continued, voice trembling. But seeing it, it's different. It's real. And I can't pretend it won't complicate things. He stepped closer. Isabel? No, she said, holding up a hand. Let me say this. I came here not to rekindle anything. I came because I was broken. And you didn't fix me. But you saw me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered. Not as a wife, not as a widow, but as a woman. She took a slow breath. But I won't let my son become a bridge between you and your guilt. If you stay because you feel responsible, you'll resent us both eventually. And I won't let Daniel grow up feeling like he's a reminder of what you lost. Lucas's chest ached. I don't see him as that. Not now, she said softly. But what about when he's 5, 10? When he calls you Uncle Lucas and asks why you look at him like you're sad? Will you tell him the truth? That his face reminds you of a child you never got to hold? He didn't answer, because he didn't know. Isabel stepped forward and placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. You have to decide. Are you staying for me, or for the ghost of who we were? I'm staying for you, he said, voice breaking. For the woman who survived losing everything and still chose to carry life. She smiled through her tears. Then stay as my friend, not my savior. And for Clara's sake, her voice softened. Stop letting my presence make you doubt her love. She's not scared of me. She's scared you'll never believe you deserve her. He closed his eyes. I do deserve her, but I'm terrified I'll wake up one day and realize this is all too good to be true, and that I'll ruin it just like before. You won't, Isabel said firmly, because this time you're not alone, and neither am I. From the doorway, Clara's voice came softly. I heard everything. They both turned. She stood there, arms full of books, eyes red-rimmed but steady. I wasn't eavesdropping, she said, setting the books down. I just came home early. Lucas's heart pounded. Clara, I know, she interrupted, walking toward them. And I'm not angry. I'm relieved. She looked at Isabel. You said the words. Couldn't say. The ones I've been too afraid to voice. She turned to Lucas. You don't have to carry our past like a debt. You just have to carry us, as we are right now. He reached for her, and this time, she came without hesitation, resting her forehead against his chest. I'm scared too, she whispered. Scared that loving Daniel will mean losing you. But I'd rather risk that than live in a love that's half-given. Isabel moved to the couch and sat slowly, one hand on her belly. He kicked again this morning, she said quietly, right after I saw his face on the screen, like he was saying, Don't worry, Mama. I'm here. Clara walked over and knelt beside her, placing a hand on her sister's stomach. After a moment, she felt it. A soft, insistent flutter. He's real, Clara said, tears spilling over. And so are we. Lucas watched them. Two women bound by blood, forged by loss, choosing each other even when it hurt. And in that moment, he understood. Love wasn't about choosing one over the other. It was about making space for both. But as the sun dipped below the skyline and the city lights flickered on, a new question settled in his chest, quiet but insistent, and makes your pulse race for no reason at all. Lucas sat on the balcony. The city lights stretched below him like scattered embers. The watch Clara now wore ticking softly against his memory. He hadn't slept well in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw two faces. The ghost of the child he and Isabel had lost, and the living one growing inside her now. Inside, Clara and Isabel were washing dishes, their voices low, laughter threading through the quiet like something fragile and precious. He should have joined them, but fear kept him rooted, fear that if he stepped back into that warmth, he'd say the wrong thing, feel the wrong way, and shatter the peace they'd built. Then the door slid open. Clara stepped out, wrapped in a light sweater, the evening breeze tugging at her hair. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him looking out at the skyline. "You're pulling away again," she said finally, voice soft but certain. "I'm not," he replied too quickly. She turned to him, eyes searching. "You think I don't notice? You smile, you hold my hand, you say all the right things. But your eyes, they're somewhere else." He looked down. "I'm scared, Clara." "Of what?" "That when Daniel is born, I won't know how to hold him." His voice cracked. "What if I look at him and all I see is what we lost? What if I can't love him without drowning in grief all over again?" She stepped closer, her hand finding his. "Then you'll grieve, and we'll hold you while you do. But you don't get to decide for him whether your love is worth the risk." He met her gaze, eyes glistening. "What if I fail him? What if you don't?" She countered gently. "What if you're exactly who he needs? A man who knows loss and chooses love anyway." Before he could answer, Isabel appeared in the doorway, one hand on the frame for support, her face pale but calm. "I've been thinking," she said, voice steady. "I want you in the delivery room." Lucas froze. "Isabel, no conditions," she continued. "No promises. Just be there. Not as my husband, not as his father, but as the man who loved me when I thought I was unlovable." Clara squeezed his hand. "Say yes." He looked between them, two women offering him a second chance not to rewrite the past, but to redeem it. "I'm terrified," he whispered. "Good," Isabel said, stepping onto the balcony. "That means you care." A silence settled, filled only by the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then Lucas exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing a breath he'd held for 5 years. "Yes," he said, "I'll be there." Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Thank you." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "You don't have to be perfect, Lucas. You just have to show up." He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something loosen in his chest. Not gone, but shared. Later that night, after Isabel had gone to bed and the apartment grew quiet, Clara lay beside him on the pull-out couch, her head on his chest. "Do you remember the first time we met?" she asked softly. "At the bookstore," he murmured. "You were arguing with a customer about whether a novel needed a happy ending." She smiled against his shirt. "You said, 'Some stories deserve honesty, not sugar.' And I knew right then you were different." He kissed the top of her head. "I still believe that." "Then stop trying to write a perfect ending," she whispered. "Just live the next chapter with us." Outside, the city never slept. But inside, for the first time, Lucas let himself rest. Still, as he drifted towards sleep, one thought lingered like a shadow. What if, in that delivery room, I break completely? What if my grief is louder than my love? And yet, what if it's not? The night deepened. Nightstand, the vibration loud in the silence. He knew. It was Isabel. He answered on the first ring. "Lucas," she said, voice tight with pain but steady. "It's time." He was dressed in under a minute jeans, sweater, shoes unlaced. Clara stirred as he moved, her eyes fluttering open in the dim light. "She's in labor," he whispered. Clara sat up instantly. "I'm coming too." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" She stood, already pulling on her coat. "She's my sister, and you're my heart. I'm not letting either of you walk into this alone." The drive to the hospital was silent except for Isabel's measured breathing over the speakerphone, punctuated by soft groans she tried to muffle. Lucas gripped the wheel, knuckles white, his chest so tight he could barely draw air. "You're going to be okay," Clara said, her hand on his arm. "All of you." When they arrived, Isabel was already in a delivery room, hair damp, face flushed, clutching the rails of the bed. Her eyes lit up when she saw them. Relief, fear, hope all tangled together. "You came," she breathed. "Of course we did," Clara said, rushing to her side, brushing hair from her sister's forehead. Lucas stood near the door, frozen. The room smelled of antiseptic and sweat and something else. Life raw and urgent. A nurse handed him a gown and mask. He put them on mechanically, his movements stiff. Isabel reached for him through the sheets. "Don't stand so far away." He stepped forward, took her hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice trembling. "So am I," he whispered. The contractions grew stronger, closer. Time blurred. Nurses moved in and out. Clara held Isabel's other hand, murmuring encouragement, wiping her brow. Lucas stayed rooted, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to run. From the pain, from the memory, from the unbearable echo of another hospital room. Another loss. Then, between breaths, Isabel looked up at him, eyes sharp with urgency. "Lucas," she panted. "Don't leave. Not this time. Stay with me. All the way." He swallowed hard, throat tight. "I'm here." And for the first time he meant it, not as a promise to atone, but as a vow to be present. Hours passed. Sweat, tears, cries of pain. And then the shift, the final push, the sudden, startling silence as a new sound filled the room. A cry, sharp, clear, alive. Lucas's breath caught. The nurse lifted a tiny, squirming body, purple and slick and perfect, and placed him on Isabel's chest. Isabel wept openly, cradling him, whispering words only mothers know. Clara stepped back, tears streaming down her face, her hand finding Lucas's. He couldn't move. The nurse turned to him. "Would you like to cut the cord?" He looked at Isabel. She nodded, eyes shining. "Please." With trembling hands, he took the scissors. One snip and a life began. Then the nurse cleaned the baby and, without asking, handed him to Lucas. He froze. In his arms lay Daniel. Eyes scrunched, mouth puckered, tiny fists waving. And yes, there it was. The jawline, the shape of his brow. Uncanny, unmistakable. A wave of grief surged so violently he nearly doubled over. But beneath it, something else. A warmth, connection, a love that wasn't borrowed from the past, but born in this very moment. "He's beautiful," Clara whispered beside him. Isabel, exhausted but radiant, smiled weakly. "He has Raphael's eyes and your stubborn chin." Lucas looked down at the baby, then at Isabel, then at Clara, his anchor, his future, his home. And in that sacred, trembling silence, he did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He let himself cry, not from sorrow, but from awe, from gratitude, from the terrifying, beautiful truth that life doesn't replace what's lost. It expands around it, making space for joy even in the cracks of grief. He kissed Daniel's forehead, soft, reverent, and whispered, "Welcome, little one." Outside, dawn broke over the city, golden and new. And inside that room, 3 broken hearts. One past, one present, one brand new, began to beat as one. But as Lucas held Daniel, a quiet fear still whispered, "Will this love be enough? Will I ever stop comparing him to the ghost?" Yet in the baby's tiny fingers curling around his thumb, he found his answer. Not in words, but in touch, and falling like a secret rhythm only he understood. He hadn't touched the watch since the night before the birth. It sat in Clara's drawer, safe but silent, as if waiting for a moment worthy of its promise. Then, on the 8th morning, Clara found him on the hospital roof at sunrise, coffee gone cold in his hands, eyes fixed on the city waking below. "You haven't gone home," she said, stepping beside him. "I keep thinking he'll disappear," he admitted, voice rough with exhaustion. "That I'll wake up and this will all have been a dream. Another cruel trick of grief." She leaned against the railing, close but not touching. "He's real, Lucas, and so is your place in his life." He turned to her, eyes raw. "Do you ever look at him and wonder if I'll love him more than you?" She didn't flinch. "I wonder if you'll finally believe you're allowed to love anyone fully, including me." He looked down, shame creeping in. "I'm trying. I know," she said softly. But trying isn't the same as trusting. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of traffic and the flutter of pigeons taking flight. Inside, Isabel was feeding Daniel, humming a lullaby Raphael used to sing. Lucas had heard it through the door, gentle, broken, healing. "I held him last night," he said suddenly. While Isabel slept, he curled his fingers around mine, and for the first time I didn't think about the baby we lost. I just saw him, Daniel, not a ghost, not a replacement, just a boy who needed someone to hold him. Clara's eyes filled with tears. That's when it changes, isn't it? Not when you decide to love, but when you stop fighting it. He finally looked at her, really looked. "I don't want to lose you, Clara. I don't want our love to become collateral damage in my healing." "You won't lose me," she said, stepping closer. "But you have to stop treating my love like it's fragile. It's not. It's strong enough to hold both of you." He reached for her then, slowly, as if afraid she might vanish, and when she stepped into his arms, he held her like he was anchoring himself to the earth. Later that afternoon, back in Isabel's room, Daniel was awake, blinking up at the world with wide, dark eyes. Isabel sat propped up in bed, weaker than she let on, but smiling. "He's been looking for you," she said when Lucas entered. He approached the bassinet, heart in his throat. Daniel turned his head toward him, as if he knew. "Here," Isabel said, holding out her arms. "Take him." Lucas hesitated only a second before lifting the baby carefully, cradling him against his chest. Daniel settled instantly, letting out a soft sigh. "He likes your voice," Isabel said. "Last night, when he was fussy, I played that voicemail you left me, years ago, before we lost, before everything. Just your voice saying, 'I'll be home soon.' He quieted right away." Lucas's breath hitched. "You kept that." "I kept everything," she whispered. "Not because I wanted you back, but because I needed to remember that once we were kind to each other." Clara stood in the doorway watching them, Lucas holding Daniel, Isabel watching with quiet tenderness. And for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like part of something sacred. She walked over and placed a hand on Lucas's back. "You're good with him." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "I'm learning." That evening, as golden lights spilled through the hospital windows, the three of them sat together. Daniel asleep on Lucas's chest, Clara leaning against his shoulder, Isabel watching them with a peace she hadn't known in years. No one spoke of the future. Not yet. But in that room, something had shifted. Lucas wasn't just the man who bought a watch to buy back time. He was the man who finally learned to live in it. Still, as the shadows lengthened and the city lights flickered on, a quiet question lingered in the air. Unspoken, but felt by all. Now that Daniel is here, what kind of family will we become? The answer wouldn't come in grand declarations. It would come in midnight feedings, shared glances, and the courage to keep that first night home. Daniel cried for hours. Not in pain, just in the raw, disoriented way newborns do, as if mourning the warmth of the womb. Isabel rocked him, voice hoarse from exhaustion, her body still healing, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. Clara made chamomile tea, warmed bottles, folded tiny socks with trembling hands. And Lucas paced. He wanted to help. But every time he reached for Daniel, doubt crept in. What if I drop him? What if he senses my fear? What if I'm not enough? Finally, at 2 a.m., Clara found him on the balcony again, staring into the dark. "You're running," she said softly. "I'm not," he said, but his voice betrayed him. "Yes, you are. Not out the door, but into your head. You think love is something you have to be perfect at. But it's not. It's something you show up for. Messy, tired, scared." He turned to her, eyes glistening. "What if I break him?" "You won't," she said firmly. "But even if you stumble, he'll still be loved. By all of us." Inside, Daniel's cries softened into whimpers. Isabel's voice floated through the open window, low, tender, singing the same lullaby Raphael used to hum. Clara took Lucas's hand. Go to him. He hesitated. What if I cry? Then cry, she said, squeezing his fingers. Let him know it's safe to feel. Heart-pounding, Lucas stepped back inside. Isabel looked up from the rocking chair, Daniel cradled against her chest. She didn't say a word, just held out her arms, not to take him back, but to pass him forward. Lucas took a breath and reached for his nephew. The moment Daniel was in his arms, something shifted. The baby's cries stilled. His tiny body relaxed. And Lucas didn't move. He just stood there, tears streaming down his face, whispering, "I've got you. I've got you." Isabel watched him, tears in her own eyes. "He knows you," she whispered. "He's known you all along." Later, when Daniel finally slept, Lucas sat with him on the couch, one hand supporting the baby's head, the other tracing the curve of his cheek. Clara sat beside him, her head on his shoulder. Isabel curled up in the armchair, wrapped in a blanket, watching them with quiet awe. "He looks like Raphael when he sleeps," she said softly. "But when he's awake, he has your intensity." Lucas smiled faintly. "He has your strength." A silence settled, warm and full. Then Clara spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I used to dream of a white picket fence, a quiet life with just us. But this is better. Messier. Real." Isabel nodded. "Love isn't about having the perfect family. It's about creating one from the pieces you have." Lucas looked down at Daniel, then at Clara, then at Isabel. "I don't know how to be an uncle, or a partner, or whatever I am to you both." "You don't have to name it," Clara said. "Just live it." He leaned his head against hers, Daniel sleeping peacefully between them. But later that night, when the apartment finally stilled and moonlight spilled across the floor, Lucas lay awake again, Daniel breathing softly in the bassinet beside him. He thought of the watch still in Clara's drawer. He thought of the future school plays, first steps, bedtime stories. Would he always feel like an imposter in this family? Or would time prove he belonged? Then Daniel stirred, tiny hands waving in his sleep, and let out a soft sigh, so like the one he'd made in the hospital. And Lucas knew. He didn't need a title. He didn't need perfection. He just needed to stay. But as he reached out and gently brushed the baby's cheek, a new fear flickered. Quiet, insistent. What happens when Daniel asks about his father? Will I be able to honor Raphael without erasing myself? The night held its breath, and Lucas stayed, present, imperfect, loving. Cries now punctuated by gurgles and the first hints of laughter. The apartment no longer felt like Clara's alone or a temporary refuge for Isabel. It had become something else entirely. A home stitched together by midnight feedings, mismatched socks, and the quiet hum of 3 adults learning to love without conditions. But the real test came on a rainy afternoon in late April. Isabel was folding laundry in the living room while Daniel napped in his swing. Lucas sat at the dining table, reviewing legal documents for a new foundation he was launching. One that would support grieving parents, built from the ashes of his own silence. Clara was shelving books in her corner nook when she found it. An old sketchbook tucked behind a stack of novels. She opened it slowly. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, all of Lucas, some from years ago. Him sleeping on the couch, him reading by the window, him holding Isabel's hand in the hospital bed after their loss. And newer ones, recent, raw, of him holding Daniel, of him laughing with Clara, of him standing on the balcony at dawn, shoulders heavy but unbent. Tears filled her eyes. Isabel looked up, saw the sketchbook, and froze. "You kept drawing him," Clara whispered. Isabel stood slowly, one hand resting on the back of the sofa for support. "I didn't mean for anyone to see." Clara walked over, holding the book open to a sketch of Lucas holding Daniel, his expression tender, his eyes full of something Isabel had once thought lost forever. "You still love him." Isabel didn't deny it. "Not the way you think. I don't want him back. But I'll always love the man he was to me, and the man he's becoming because of us." Clara's voice trembled. "Does it hurt, seeing him with me?" "Sometimes," Isabel admitted, her honesty quiet but unflinching. But it hurts more to imagine him alone. You make him brave, Clara. And I'll never resent that. Just then, Daniel let out a soft coo from his swing. Both women turned. Lucas looked up from his papers, drawn by the sound. He saw the sketchbook in Clara's hands, saw Isabel's flushed cheeks, and instantly tensed. "What is it?" he asked, standing. Clara held the book out to him. "She never stopped seeing you." He took it slowly, flipping through the pages, each line a memory, each shadow a silent apology. His throat tightened. "Isabel, I didn't know you kept these. I needed to remember you were human," she said softly. "Not just the man who left, but the one who stayed, even when he didn't know how." He looked up at her, eyes bright. "I'm sorry I made you draw me in secret." "You didn't," she said. "I chose to, because hope is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout. It sketches in the margins of grief." Clara stepped closer to Lucas, her hand finding his. "You're not a ghost in her past, Lucas. You're part of her healing. And that doesn't threaten us. It strengthens us." He pulled her into his side, still holding the sketchbook, and looked at Isabel. "I want you to keep drawing. Not just me, but all of us. Together." Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "I already have." She went to her room and returned with another sketchbook. Smaller, newer. She opened it to the first page. There they were. Lucas holding Daniel, Clara leaning against his shoulder, Isabel watching them from the kitchen doorway, sunlight wrapping around them like a blessing. Underneath, in delicate script, she'd written, "Family isn't blood. It's who shows up." Lucas couldn't speak. He just held the book to his chest like a prayer. Later that evening, after Daniel was fed and asleep, the three of them sat on the balcony under a sky streaked with twilight. The city hummed below, indifferent to the quiet revolution happening above. "I've decided," Isabel said suddenly, voice calm but sure. "I'm not moving out." Clara turned to her. "You don't have to say that to make us feel better." "I'm not," Isabel said. "I'm saying it because this is what Daniel needs. Not just a mother, but an aunt who reads him poetry, and an uncle who holds him like he's the most precious thing in the world." She looked at Lucas. "And because I finally believe I deserve to be loved without having to leave first." Lucas reached across the small table and took her hand. "You always did." Clara squeezed his knee under the table, her eyes shining. "We're not a perfect family, but we're ours." A silence settled, warm and full, like a blanket pulled tight. But as the stars blinked awake, a quiet thought moved through Lucas's mind. Not fear this time, but wonder. What if this is enough? Not despite the past, but because of it? He looked at Daniel's empty bassinet just inside the sliding door, then at the two women beside him, sisters in heart, mothers in spirit, his anchors in the storm. And for the first time, he didn't brace for loss. He leaned into love. Because some families aren't born, they're chosen. But the real shift wasn't in routines, it was in silence. The kind of silence that once meant distance now meant peace. The kind that used to carry ghosts now carried lullabies. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and painted the room in amber, Clara stood in the kitchen humming softly while washing dishes. Lucas sat on the floor nearby, Daniel on his lap, the baby's tiny fingers clutching a teething ring, eyes wide with wonder at the man who held him like he was made of stars. Isabel watched from the doorway, sketchbook open in her hands, pencil moving gently, capturing the curve of Daniel's foot resting on Lucas's forearm, the way Lucas's eyes softened when the baby cooed. Then Clara turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and walked to the bedroom. When she returned, she held the velvet box. Lucas looked up, startled. She didn't speak, just opened it and took out the watch, the one he'd bought her on the night everything changed. She fastened it around her own wrist again, the silver glinting in the fading light. "I kept it," she said softly. "Not because I needed a symbol, but because I believed you'd come back to it." He stood slowly, handing Daniel to Isabel, who took him with practiced ease. Clara stepped closer. "You don't owe me grand gestures, Lucas, But I want you to know, I never stopped waiting for you to believe you were worthy of this. He reached for her hand, the one wearing the watch, and pressed it to his lips. I'm not the man I was when I bought this. No, she agreed, tears glistening. You're better. From the couch, Isabel spoke, voice tender. Raphael once told me that time isn't measured in years, but in moments you choose to stay. Lucas looked at her, then at Daniel, then back at Clara. Then let me give you a new beginning. Not because the past is behind us, but because we've carried it together. He pulled a small envelope from his pocket, plain, unmarked. He'd written it that morning, after watching Daniel fall asleep with his tiny hand curled around Lucas's finger. Inside was a single key. To my penthouse, he said. I sold it. Clara blinked. What? I don't need it, he said, voice steady. I've been living here, really living, since the night I saw Isabel in this doorway. That apartment was a monument to loneliness. This place. This is home. Isabel stood, shifting Daniel to her hip. Lucas? I'm not asking for anything, he said gently. Just saying I'm all in. No escape routes. No backup plans. Just us. Messy, real, and together. Clara's breath caught. She looked at the watch on her wrist, then at the man before her, no longer haunted, no longer running. She stepped into his arms and held him like she'd been waiting a lifetime to do so without fear. Later, after Daniel was bathed and fed and asleep in his crib, the three of them sat on the balcony under a sky dusted with stars. A soft breeze carried the sound of distant music and the murmur of the city below. Clara leaned her head on Lucas's shoulder. Do you ever wonder what our life would have been like if we'd never lost that baby? Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Every day. But I don't wish it away anymore. Because if we hadn't broken, we wouldn't have made space for Daniel. For Clara. He looked at her. For this. Isabel smiled faintly, sketching the three of them in the moonlight. Clara's hand in Lucas's free arm around her shoulders, Daniel sleeping in her lap. I used to think love was about holding on, she said. But it's really about letting go and trusting someone to catch you. Lucas reached over and placed his hand over hers, over the sketch, over the past, over the future they were building together. And in that quiet night, with the watch ticking softly on Clara's wrist and Daniel breathing peacefully inside, Lucas finally understood. The watch wasn't about buying back time. It was about choosing to stay in it, fully, fiercely, together. But as the stars blinked above and the city sighed below, one question still lingered. Not in fear, but in wonder. What kind of man will Daniel become with three hearts loving him as one? Clara sat on a blanket nearby, sketching not in words but in watercolors. Soft blues for Lucas's steadiness, warm golds for Isabel's resilience, and a bright, swirling green for Daniel, who seemed to carry spring itself in his laugh. No one spoke for a long while. They didn't need to. The silence was full of trust rebuilt, grief honored, love chosen daily. It was the kind of peace that doesn't arrive with fanfare, but settles like dew, quiet, essential, life-giving. Then Daniel stumbled, catching himself in the grass with a soft oof. He looked up, bottom lip trembling, ready to cry, but when his eyes found Lucas, something shifted. He didn't reach for his mother. He reached for him. Lucas scooped him up without hesitation, brushing dirt from his knees, murmuring, "You're okay, little man. I've got you." Isabel watched, tears glistening but unshed. "He trusts you completely." "He should," Clara said softly from the blanket. "You've never let him fall." Lucas looked down at Daniel, who now rested his cheek against Lucas's shoulder, thumb in his mouth, eyelids heavy from the sun and play. "I used to think love was about fixing what was broken," he said, voice rough with emotion. "But it's not. It's about holding space for the broken pieces and building something new around them." Isabel walked over and sat beside Clara on the blanket. "Raphael would have loved this," she said. "He always believed in second chances." "He gave us one," Clara replied, placing a hand over Isabel's. "And we honored it." A breeze stirred the trees, sending leaves spiraling like falling secrets. In the distance, a dog barked, children laughed. Life moved on. Unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding beneath the old oak tree, Lucas lowered himself onto the blanket, Daniel now asleep in his lap, tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. He looked at Clara, her hair loose, her eyes calm, the watch still on. Her wrist, its face catching the light like a silent vow. "I never thanked you," he said. "For what?" "For not walking away when the past walked in." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I didn't stay because the past disappeared. I stayed because I saw you facing it. And that was the bravest thing I'd ever witnessed." Isabel reached over and took Lucas's free hand. "We're not a tragedy," she said softly. "We're a mosaic. Cracked pieces made whole by how we fit together." And they did fit, not perfectly but true. Not as lovers, not as rivals, but as three souls who had weathered loss and chosen, again and again, to build a future from the ruins. Later, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the grass, Daniel stirred awake. He blinked up at Lucas, then reached for Isabel, then pointed at Clara with a toothy grin. "He knows," Clara whispered. "He knows we're his." Lucas stood, lifting Daniel onto his hip. "I used to think thresholds were endings," he said, looking back at the path that led out of the park. The same kind of threshold he'd crossed a year ago in fear. "But they're not. They're invitations." "To what?" Isabel asked. "To stay, to grow, to love without conditions." They walked back toward the city together, 3 adults, 1 child, no labels, just presence. No grand declarations, no tidy endings, just life, messy and tender and real. And as they disappeared into the golden evening, the wind carried a single fallen leaf across the empty blanket, where moments before, 3 hearts had beat as one. The story didn't end here. It deepened, continued, because love isn't a destination. It's the courage to walk forward, hand in hand, even when the path is made of broken glass and scattered memories. And Lucas? He no longer feared the threshold. He carried it with him, not as a wound, but as a